Hello, this is Jay Mitchell, and we are back with another episode of Libertarian Censored Podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have the GOP's fiscal hawk era is officially over from Bloomberg.com, and that was posted by Donald Key. And yeah, personally, I would say the GOP have never been fiscal hawks, at least not in my lifetime. You know, maybe they've marketed themselves as being very fiscally conservative, but you know they're just spend like there is no tomorrow, just like the Democrats will. And yeah, that just goes to show you how the two parties might market themselves as being very different, but they're pretty much the same thing when push comes to shove. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Trump blasts Rand Paul as crazy for resisting tax cut bill over debt limit from Bloomberg.com, posted by Donald Key. And yeah, it just goes to show you how, Trump, he'll go after anyone who dissents at all from whatever his agenda is. And yeah, personally, I like Rand Paul. I would agree much more with him that this big, beautiful bill is just, if the Democrats were the one passing it, Republicans would be united. How it would be the worst thing ever. But since Donald Trump is the one pushing for it, suddenly, it's the greatest thing ever. And that just goes to show you how a lot of people don't have values when it comes to politics. Only teams. And yeah, personally, I think Rand Paul is probably one of the best Republicans because he's one of the only ones willing to stand up to Trump when push comes to shove. And yeah, I think, so a lot of Redditors will say, well, Rand Paul will always bend the knee in the end. Well, I personally think, you do have to bend your knee to Trump sometimes, because if you're too actively anti-Trump, he'll have you pretty much canceled and thrown out of politics entirely, like he's done to countless figures at this point. So I think if Rand Paul wants to stand, I think Rand Paul walks a good fine line between standing up to him as much as he possibly can without actively being thrown out of politics altogether. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have report on Russia's 2016 election, U.S. election meddling disappears from Senate website from Newsweek.com, posted by Patom13, and that's a cross post from the technology subreddit. And yeah, I personally think, it's like kind of like the boy who cried wolf at this point. It's the Democrat who cried Russia. And, the Democrats have been saying Russia, Russia, Russia for years at this point. Maybe Russia did influence the 2016 election, but outside actors have always been trying to influence presidential elections, but the Democrats only seem to care about Russia in 2016. They didn't care that in 1996 Al Gore spoke at a Chinese government-funded fundraiser, but in 2016, since it's all Trump's a Russian asset, and you're not allowed to dissent from that. It's like the Democrats need to blame themselves rather than blame Russia. It's like in the South Park movie, when the parents saying blame Canada instead of taking responsibility for their children. It's like that with the Democrats. They're saying blame Russia. It's not our fault. Well, in reality, it is mostly the Democrats' fault. It's not because they ran candidates so shitty that they lost to Trump 2 out of 3 times, and the third time they barely won, and it was only because Trump had pretty much the worst year possibly imaginable that an incumbent president could have. And yeah, that just goes to show you how the people are tired of the Democrats not taking personal responsibility, and that's why the party is as unpopular as it is currently. The Democrats need to start taking personal responsibility rather than blame everything on Russia, Russia, Russia. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have, well, Tom, as a matter of fact I have, and you're friends with a good chunk of them, posted by Gen Z Gingy, and that's a screenshot of a Tom Woods tweet. Woke right is a low IQ term invented by former leftists to police the right of center world. Have you ever met anyone on the right who thinks that what is true depends on who says it and which side they're on? I have met precisely 0 people who fit that description. And as I said earlier, I personally would agree that, a lot of people these days don't have values, only teams. And, a lot of people on the right, as Gen Z hints with their comment, if the Democrat says something, it'll be the worst thing ever, but if Donald Trump says it, it's completely justified. And yeah, it's like that these days for a lot of people, both on left and the right. As I always like to repeat, they don't have values, only teams, and they'll just justify whatever the official narrative is without questioning it, even if it goes against what they might have been saying like a week or two ago. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And we have Judge says Trump administration must provide hormone therapy accommodations to transgender inmates from CBSNews.com, posted by Dr. Crew 07. And yeah, I would say that, ultimately, if the courts want to force the Trump administration to provide hormone therapy and accommodations to transgender inmates, they can justify saying whatever they want to. But, ultimately, if Trump wants to disregard that, he's in the position of authority to say so. Personally, I don't think taxpayer money should be going to hormone therapy for prisoners or any accommodations for them. It's interesting how, prison isn't supposed to be this nice and accommodating place by what the progressives want you to think. Just because you're transgender doesn't mean, let's say a transgender person murdered a person. Just because you're transgender doesn't entitle you to special rights that different than any other murderer. And that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Animal Farm's 7 Commandments and the Bill of Rights, posted by Ragnar OKXG, and they said, I was reading Animal Farm again, and it got me thinking. In the book, the animals start with clear rules, the 7 Commandments, but the pig slowly changes until they mean nothing. Like all animals are equal, become some are more equal than others. And it's a story about how power can corrupt, and it made me wonder about how our own Bill of Rights here in the U.S. I'm not saying America is like Animal Farm, we're a democracy, but are we seeing some similar patterns? Rules changing over time, are some of our rights slowly being changed or read differently? Not for getting rid of them, but I need to by new laws or court decisions. Like how we talk about privacy, 4th Amendment, or free speech online, 1st Amendment. It's not a sudden wipeout, but a slow shift. For our own good arguments, the pigs are always said their changes were for the farm safety. Do we sometimes hear similar reasonings in the U.S. when rights are limited, like for national security? What's the line between safety and losing freedom? Spin and news. In the book, a pig named Squealer was a master at twisting facts. Today, with so much misinformation and different news sources, it can be hard to know what's true about our rights. Are we all equal? The animal's right about rule about equality got twisted. Well, our Constitution aims for everyone to be equal under the law. We are seeing some groups or people still face different treatment when it comes to their rights. It's a big question, and I'm just thinking out loud, but the idea that good rules can get bent out of shape feels very real. What do you guys think? Am I seeing things, or is there something in that comparison when we think about keeping our rights strong? And yeah, my thoughts on that are, the Bill of Rights and Constitution, have always failed countless times to be a check against the government. They disregard them whenever it's opportune. And yeah, it kind of is like Animal Farm. They have these rules. The rules they're supposed to follow by, but they never seem to follow by them. And that's how you can't trust the government when it comes to your rights. There might be a Bill of Rights, but ultimately the government isn't the protector of our rights. I mean, it should be the protector of our rights, but it ultimately isn't. Our rights don't come from the government; they're innate. They come from within, and yeah, ultimately, our rights aren't something you should take for granted. They can be taken away at any second, at any time, if the government feels like justifying it, since they have the monopoly on the legal use of force. And that's not something I personally care for, but, they're the ones with the military and police and courts on their side. So that's my thoughts on that issue. And yeah, I think we're gonna wrap it up there, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.